worse and worse. And on that note, Jonathan, let's bring you right in on the conversation. What do you think?
Well, hello.
Well, hello. This is Jonathan Bailor, the Smarter Science of Slim. We're talking about hormone imbalance, early ages in teens that could lead to onset of diabetes, insulin resistance. I mean, you talk about a lot of this in your book.
Well, let me raise the stakes a little bit, if you don't mind, regarding younger people and how hormones can be negatively impacting them. If you don't mind,
No, I want you to, and then I'll introduce you formally, but go right ahead. Jump in.
So, working on some new research for an upcoming new book, and one of the areas I'm looking into is an area called epigenetics, which is the study of how the health of the mother, even prior to pregnancy or during pregnancy, can influence the genetic expression of her fetus. Translating this, researchers have shown that, for example, an insulin-resistant or diabetic mother, what happens, her baby in utero is getting flooded with glucose. However, the insulin from the mother is not able to successfully go through the umbilical cord into the fetus. So the fetus's little developing pancreas has to work overtime, and its cells become insulin resistant, and its pancreas starts to break down even before it is born. And studies have shown that these children are astronomically then more likely to become pre-diabetic and diabetic when they reach the age of their age of maturity, thereby just perpetuating this, what could be an endless cycle of this potentially fatal disease. So there's no joke here, no joke.
No, hormone balance is becoming the silent epidemic, and we're going to be addressing that tonight with Jonathan Bailor. He's the author of The Smarter Science of Slim, Scientific Proof, Fat Loss Facts. Bailor has a proven track record and a passion for solving tough problems. He is an accomplished public speaker with a knack for entertaining while he educates. Bailor speaks to and consults with Fortune 50 companies and has done so for the past decade. As an entrepreneur, he has started successful businesses, authored the critically acclaimed book, The Smarter Science of Slim, produced a promotional magazine, helped develop a radio show, holds more than 20 U.S. patents, and invented the marquee feature in Microsoft Office 2010. And this book has been a 10-year odyssey to analyze thousands of scientific studies, and he interviewed top medical researchers regarding the proven science of long-term health and fat loss. Upon discovering a disturbing disconnect between what the scientific community had proven about wellness and what we as a society are told, Bailor committed his life to work with top doctors and scientists around the world to make the research he gathered accessible to everyone. Pretty impressive. And if you're just joining us, of course, this is Holy Hormones, Honey, the greatest story never told. I'm Leslie Botha, your host. Jonathan Bailor is my guest. Jonathan, I posted an article on my blog in 2009, and it was titled, What is Hormone Imbalance? And I got a couple of hits on it. A couple women commented they were having problems. And then in June, now this is 3 years later, and the article is now archived, and it's, buried. I mean, someone really have to be searching for it. And all of a sudden, between June and September, I've had over 200 comments from women suffering horribly from what they're beginning to realize is hormone imbalance. Anxiety, fatigue, hair loss, weight gain, agoraphobia, depression, manic depression, irritability, rage. And of course, the cycle goes on because these women are being put on drugs. And it's, you just read their stories and you can see, well, this is just one, like a domino effect going on. And these women are getting more and more imbalanced, because the drugs just mask the symptoms, and they're getting nutritionally depleted. And some doctors are even telling them to get pregnant so they feel better again. And and then what happens on the other side is their hormones drop after the pregnancy. They're more severely depleted, they're nutritionally depleted, and they're even more messed up anxiety-wise. And this is a huge, huge issue. And then we have weight gain and obesity, all wrapped into this. Can you explain what hormones are, what hormone balance is, and how important this rhythmic dance is in the body?
Leslie, I think maybe a good way to characterize it is hormones are going to be the calories of the new millennia, right? Like over the past 30 years, we've been just inundated with this talk of calories. Like we can all talk about calorie counts, and we can talk about calories in, and we can talk about calories out, and we can talk about balancing calories, and we talk about obesity, we talk about many calories, and we talk about all that kind of fun stuff. Whereas what science is discovering is that really calories are a bit of a red herring, and that calories only matter because of their impact on hormones, and that so many other things impact hormones. And the reason hormones matter so much is they're essentially the language that our various parts of our body speak to each other. So right now, I'm speaking English to you and your listeners, and you and your listeners all understand English, so we can communicate via English. Our muscle tissue and our gut and our intestines and our nervous system and our brain, they all communicate via hormones. That's what they speak. They speak hormones. So if we want our body to communicate something different, what I mean when I say that is, for example, communicate burn fat rather than store fat, or if we want our body to communicate feel energetic rather than lethargic, we have to change that hormonal conversation. And to be clear, there are obviously genetic components here, but we do have a surprising amount of control on our hormones. The two biggest control mechanisms we have are the foods we eat and or three biggest things: the food we eat, the exercise we get, and then things like rest and sleep and things like that. So lifestyle factors.
Can I ask you, are you moving back and forth in front of your phone? And because you're kind of cutting in and out on us, and everything you have to say is really important here.
Oh, sorry. No, is this any better?
Yeah, and Andy's nodding his head as well. The dog we can deal with. Everyone's got a dog in the background, but it was just, you've got so much to say. I want to make sure everyone listens. And let's go back to epigenetics now, because this is a very important science that's coming down the pike, and it's fascinating. What we don't realize is what we build up in our bodies in this toxic day and age is passed on to our offspring. What we don't realize that the years and the generations of synthetic birth control now that has been ingested by millions and millions of women is now passed on to our offspring. And that further inhibits hormone balance before that baby is even born, plus everything that you said at the top of the hour.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I guess there's good news and there's bad news, right? There is a silver lining here. I mean, one could sort of say, oh, my God, this is just this massive problem, and what do we do? And that's one interpretation. Another interpretation is that there is a pretty simple, I won't say easy, and I'll say that intentionally, but there's a pretty simple solution to this, and that's to eliminate these negative stimuli from our life. And that sometimes people will say, you often hear an analogy between smoking and eating improper foods. People say, well, you can just not smoke. You can't just not eat. But that's a false dichotomy. When people say don't smoke, they say don't smoke. They don't say don't breathe. And no one's saying don't eat. All we have to do is eat food. And if we just eat food, I'm going to define food as something you find directly in nature, and that's edible. So if you cannot find it in nature, like bread cannot be found in nature. And I realize that, like, the Bible calls it the staff of life, but no matter what we try to do, for example, the wheat we consume today isn't the wheat that was consumed in biblical times. Completely different plant. It has a different chromosomal makeup, and it causes hormonal wackiness in our body. So on one hand, it's just like, oh, my God, we're getting it from all angles, and that's true. But on the other hand, the solution is so clear. It's just eat food, sleep, and be active. That's all we have to do.
There you go, Andy. Eat food, sleep, and be active.
I try.
I know. All right, so let's get down to the nitty-gritty of this. I mean, and Jonathan, you have said before, the solution is simple, the evidence. We did not have this condition before we had processed foods fake foods, right? I mean, and then combined with genetically soil depletion, obviously.
Exactly, and I even dare to say they're not foods, right? These are edible products. They are things that do not need to be refrigerated. They're things that do not need to be frozen. They're things that aren't alive and really were never alive. Like, there's no bread bush in nature. Like, there's no such thing as living bread. Bread is a plant that's been heavily processed and refined and then given to us in bread. If we were to eat wheat off the stalk, well, actually we can't. The body cannot synthesize that. But things like non-starchy vegetables, nutrient-dense meats and fish and whole food fats, I mean, here we are getting told that fat is bad for us when fat is found all over the place in nature. And frankly, the more we've become afraid of eating natural fats, the heavier and sicker we've become. So we've really just had this backwards approach to nutrition, which frankly has just complicated things. And if we just get back to simply eating the way we ate before we had all these problems and eating food, problems just go away.
You're listening to Holy Hormones, honey, the greatest story never told. Jonathan Bailor is my guest tonight. And, of course, I'm Leslie Botha. Nice to have you here. And, of course, you're listening to KRFC Fort Collins. So if we just go back to eating the basics, eating plant foods, plant-derived foods, a lot of these problems would be eliminated. Brenda Epstein was here the last time we did this show, and she and I looked at each other the whole time. We were just listening to you and fascinated by everything you had to say about this. And Brenda was trying to lose some post-pregnancy weight, and I'm always just trying to lose those few extra pounds anyway. And we both changed our diets. And Brenda and I would see each other at the farmer's market and say, "How are you doing? How are you doing?" The last time I saw Brenda, well, one of the last times I saw her this summer, she said, "I'm doing great. I'm dropping that weight, and I'm not out jogging and wrecking my knees. I'm happy. This works for me." And it really did work. We eliminated a lot of the grains out of our diet. Based on your book and what you were talking about, and it really did make a significant difference.
That's great. That's great to hear. And two important points which will echo that and hopefully help your listeners. Earlier, you had sort of summarized what I said. You mentioned, natural foods, plants. I don't know if you consciously left off animals, but certainly animals are a natural food source, which, certainly if we avoid animals because of moral reasons or whatever, that's fine. But from a nutritional perspective, the science is pretty clear that they are very, very valuable from a nutritional and hormonal perspective, assuming they are not also contaminated with hormones and toxins and things like that.
Yeah, it's a big assumption. Go ahead.
No, absolutely. In terms of the elimination of grain, so one thing that I want to make clear to the listeners is generally, a key pillar of human psychology is that if you tell someone they can't have something, that generally doesn't work out well, right? Like, don't think of the color blue. What's everyone thinking about right now, right? The color blue.
Well, Andrew's wearing a blue T-shirt, so I'm kind of looking at blue. Okay.
So, the key thing to keep in mind, I find, that's very successful is to always pursue the positive rather than attacking the negative. So what I try to tell people is if we can eat so much sane food, or what I describe as healthy, high-quality food, satisfying, unaggressive, nutritious, and inefficient foods, which I can explain more later, if we can fill ourselves with so much of that food that we're too full for insane starches and sweets, life is a heck of a lot more enjoyable. It's a heck of a lot easier because I don't know too many people who want to or are willing to go through life hungry. So it's not about not eating food. In fact, the key to hormonal health, I would argue, is eating an abundance of the right types of food. It is the most effective medication out there.
All right. I think we need to delve into that one right now. Let's not talk about it later. Let's do it. Let's define sane for me one more time in terms of sane foods, and then describe the insane foods, and let's just nail this thing.
Sure. So SANE is just an acronym for the 4 factors that scientists have shown determine the quality of a calorie. The S stands for satiety, which is just how quickly a calorie fills us up and how long it keeps us full. A good example of a calorie with low satiety are, we hear things like there's always room for Jell-O. That's true, and that's not a good thing. That's because Jell-O doesn't fill us up. Sugar and sweeteners do not fill us up. That's why you can drink 300 calories worth of soda and just continue to eat an entire pizza, whereas if you ate 300 calories of food, it would satisfy you and you would be too full to eat anything else. So we want to eat high satiety foods. And I'll talk about what these are when I get through all 4 of the factors.
Sure.
Because they're all the same, and that makes life simple for us, which is great. Then we want to talk about aggressive foods. We want to eat unaggressive foods, meaning we want to eat foods that don't rush into our bloodstream and just overwhelm our body with glucose. This is the most well-known factor. It has to do a lot with glycemic load and glycemic index and insulin response. Basically, we want to eat foods that aren't aggressive, do not trigger a surge of blood sugar, and do not trigger a surge of the hormone insulin. So that's unaggressive foods. Things that are nutritious is the N in SANE. And the key thing here, we're led to believe, we've got all the facts on nutrition, and we really don't. The way nutrition is represented to us is horribly inaccurate because we are told about nutrition from a quantity perspective. For example, if you look at a serving of whole grains, generally we'll be told that's a great source of fiber. But what we hear is that, sure, you get, 4 grams of fiber and 250 calories worth of whole grains. However, if you were to eat 250 calories worth of non-starchy vegetables, you get about 46 grams of fiber. So the problem we hear about nutrition is we hear about nutrition just from a raw quantity perspective, like how much fiber do we get in a serving of this? But we don't think about nutrition quality or how many calories it's taking us to get that amount of nutrition. So we need to think of nutrition per calorie, and when we do that, the types of foods we consider to be nutritious actually changes pretty dramatically. The final factor is the E in SANE, or efficiency. This is the least well-known factor, and it has to do with how easily our body can convert food into body fat. So, for example, if we were to consume 300 calories of a starch, by the time that goes through all of the chemical processes that are involved with taking a piece of bread and turning it into triglyceride or body fat that sits on our hips, that would burn about 100 of those 200 calories just to do those chemical processes. However, if we were to eat 300 calories worth of protein, we would burn twice that, meaning that protein is twice as inefficient as being stored as body fat as carbohydrate. This has huge implications for our diet in the sense that if we eat, you shouldn't do this, but conceptually, if you were to eat a 2,000-calorie diet that it was nothing but starch, and you were to eat a 2,100-calorie diet that was nothing but protein, you would store less fat, consuming more calories on the all-protein diet simply because your body is inefficient at storing protein as fat. And don't do that. It's incredibly unhealthy to do either one of those diets, but it just illustrates the point.
Because of the high caloric intake, obviously.
One, just also because it's a horribly imbalanced. You shouldn't eat just a 100% starch or protein diet. That would be a nutritionally inadequate diet.
I don't think people would do that anyway, but you never know, so there's the disclaimer here. So
absolutely.
We're off that hook there.
The summary is eat satisfying, unaggressive, nutritious, and inefficient foods. And to simplify all of that, to do that, you just need to focus on 3 things: water, fiber, and protein. Because foods that are rich in water, rich in fiber, and rich in protein are satisfying, unaggressive, nutritious, and inefficient. And as common sense might have it, those are exactly the foods that you find directly in nature. Things like non-starchy vegetables, things like nutrient-dense proteins, and things like whole food natural fats like nuts and seeds. And it sort of makes sense that those are the foods that the human body runs best on, considering that they were the only foods available to us up until about 50 years ago.
That was pretty brilliant. Right, Andy? What do you think? Do you have any questions? You're more than welcome to join in.
Not yet, but I will, actually.
Yeah, you're thinking over that. I can tell. I can tell you're thinking over there. But, okay, so non-starchy vegetables. Go give us some examples.
Sure. So from a high level, think of these as vegetables you can eat raw, generally speaking. So vegetables you put in salads, things like any green leafy vegetable, really anything that's green. And then things like cucumbers, mushrooms, tomatoes, carrots. Again, think about things you could eat raw. Things like potatoes you can't eat raw. Things like corn you can't eat raw. Those are starches. They're not vegetables. So when we talk about non-starchy vegetables, think of green things Think generally things that grow above ground and things that you can eat raw, things you put in salads. The other thing was nutrient-dense proteins. These are, by and large, things like seafood, things like organic grass-fed beef, free-range poultry, and a certain select dairy products and things like eggs. And, of course, you got to watch out for the hormone contamination there, but assuming they're not contaminated, I mean, at some point in time, I mean, our plants can be contaminated and our animals can be contaminated, so I think it's most helpful to say don't eat contaminated food rather than don't eat animals or don't eat plants, because they can both be contaminated. And then finally, whole food natural fats, which just means essentially nuts and seeds. It's a whole food and it's a natural fat, so nuts and seeds, things like cashews, walnuts, Brazil nuts, cocoa, coconuts, chia seeds, flax seeds, things like that.
Hey, Jonathan, one question about these protein diets that seem to work for some people to lose weight. What would be the consequence of that? Say if I went on something like that for 6 months and just strictly ate protein, you had mentioned that might be bad for me, or it's just a bad thing to do, and I was just kind of curious where that would take me from there.
Sure. So just to be very clear, the diet I described earlier was a 100% protein diet. So
Sure.
I don't think anyone should eat that. However, I do think protein is the nutrient which gets the least, the macronutrient which gets the least attention and should get the most. Simply because, like, for example, our body turns over, meaning breaks down and then rebuilds, about 250 grams of protein per day. This is why many of us lose strength over time. It's a condition known as sarcopenia, meaning our muscle tissue is literally disintegrating in our body if we do not consume sufficient protein. So something that is a high-protein diet is, frankly, what our society considers a high-protein diet. I do not consider a high-protein diet. For example, getting anywhere between 100 and 200 grams of protein per day, depending on your size and activity level, my research suggests is the optimal amount of protein to consume for many reasons we can get into. Our culture would consider that a very high-protein diet, but the historical and ancestral record would say that that's actually what humans ate for hundreds of thousands of years. So why is it all of a sudden a high-protein diet? So there's nothing unhealthy about a quote-unquote high-protein diet, assuming we're keeping the protein level, not at astronomical levels and keeping it 200 grams or below. In fact, it's actually quite healthy. And more importantly, the key thing to keep in mind is any diet needs to do, any way of eating needs to provide a couple things, right? It needs to fill us up. If it leaves us hungry, it's going to fail. Like, we're not going to go the rest of our lives being hungry. That's silly. That's like saying just sleep less for the rest of your life and you'll lose weight. Like, that doesn't, or just don't go to the bathroom and you'll lose weight. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Right, right.
So it's got to fill us up. It has to provide us with vitamins and minerals, like essential vitamins and minerals. It has to provide us with essential amino acids, and it has to provide us with essential fatty acids. All of those things have to happen, or we get sick and die. If you'll notice, though, that we could do that eating protein and vegetables conceptually. Like, we don't need to eat starch, and we certainly don't need to eat sugar because there's nothing uniquely nutritional about them. However, things like, again, vegetables, fruits, nuts, they're wonderful sources of nutrients. They're incredibly filling. They're wonderful sources of essential fatty acids. And then meats and seafoods are wonderful sources of the essential proteins that we need to maintain our health and fitness.
I can see a conundrum here because I think one of the myths is that carbohydrates fill us up. And, of course, we want our kids to be filled up, and not crying all the time that they're hungry. And somehow we think that the rice or the pasta or the mac and cheese, God forbid, is what's going to do it. Plus, it fits within most of our budgets. When honestly, what you're saying is it may appear to fill us up, but really our body is still starving no matter how much food we're putting in it.
That's exactly right. And the science, in fact, in this area, the area of satiety is something that has been researched heavily. And you can do very well-controlled experiments. For example, you can get one group of people and you can feed them meal A. And meal A contains whatever percentage of protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Then you can get another group of people and you can feed them meal B, which contains the exact same number of calories but contains different foods. And then you see so you do that at breakfast, for example, and then you see how many calories those people then eat freely throughout the day. So very easy to test which foods are the most satisfying. And the foods which are the most satisfying are, by and large, foods that contain the most water, foods that contain the most fiber, foods that contain the most protein, and foods that contain some fat. Fat is a critical component in terms of the hormones, which actually trigger a feeling of being satisfied in our body. This is why many of us could eat a giant salad, just like a massive salad that makes our stomach feel incredibly full, but we're like, I don't feel satisfied. You don't get that feeling of satisfaction that you might get just when you eat a little.
We're having a problem.
Food,
yeah,
but you feel satisfied.
Okay. We're getting a little breaking up there, and what? Speaking too close to the phone? Do you think,
Andy? It might be a little
yeah.
overmodulated.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, so I think that we're back on track. Of course, you're listening to Holy Hormones, honey, the greatest story never told, breaking down the myth about weight gain, obesity with Jonathan Bailor, The Smarter Science of Slim. He is the author of that book that it's making its way around the country, getting rave reviews. I imagine it's even going international at this point. Is that right, Jonathan?
It is, yeah. It's distributed in all English-speaking markets.
Oh, very excellent. So let's go back to the water fiber protein concept and the non-starchy vegetables and the proteins. I didn't hear you talk about cheese, but we'll go back to that. And then the nuts and seeds and the fat, essential fats associated with those, because our brain is made up of trillions of fat cells. And so I imagine that the nuts and seeds are crucial to brain health as well.
Absolutely. Our body, at a very high level, is water, protein, and fat. So it's a good idea to eat what we are, in a sense. So absolutely, yes.
So it's not we are what we eat, we have to eat what we are.
Exactly.
Actually, both of those make perfect sense. But I like what you said about this is how the body was initially designed, is to eat basic foods so we don't muck up the communication system. The functioning that's going on within the body. And like you said, in the last 50 years, we've really mucked up everything with throwing chemicals into the mix, processed foods.
Preservatives.
Thank you. Yeah. Preservatives, there's a big one right there. And one can really begin to understand why the hormone system, why hormone regulation starts breaking down. Did we lose you there, Jonathan?
I am, yes.
Oh, you are there. Okay. So, I mean, do you have any comment on that as well? I mean, really, the simpler we eat, the better off we're going to be.
Well, I would say, I mean, again, keep things simple. It's good not only for your body but also for your mind. And again, from a high level, it really makes sense, right? If you take a car and you put like kerosene and canola oil, and I mean, if you just put anything other than the fuel the car is designed to run on in the car, it's going to break down. I mean, it might not break down immediately. Like if you had put 90% gasoline in your gas tank and 10% water, like the car may actually run okay, but over time it's going to break down. And what we've seen happen over time is that our diet has gone from 100% food to like today, maybe 30% food, 70% edible products. Like if you look at a child's lunch, the percent of food relative to non-food is shockingly bad. So if we just get back to eating those foods and putting put the right fuel into our system, it's going to run correctly. And please don't hear this as don't enjoy food. Oh my gosh, we have to live a life of monotony and deprivation. That is not at all the case. My research shows that if we have a robust system, like if we can keep our metabolism up and running most of the time, we can deal with the occasional hiccup or treat. Like think about it like your immune system. If you have a healthy immune system and you get a cold, you're not going to die. You will just recover from the cold, because your immune system is healthy and can get you back on track for you. So if you're eating food most of the time and you want to have a treat, Or you're at a party and you want to have a treat. That's fine, because it's a treat, and you've otherwise conditioned your system to handle that appropriately. But sadly, we've moved into a culture where these poisonous foods aren't even treats. They're just like what we eat every day, and they're not even that tasty. My mother is a very smart woman, and she used to say, like, make sure it's worth it. So if it's just, some crappy candy bar, like, that's not worth it. But if you're at a wedding and they have this beautiful wedding cake, yeah, of course you should enjoy that. Those special occasions are a lot more rare than when we put these insane foods into our body nowadays.
On a daily basis. And the body would be able to break it down easier. Going back to the wedding cake concept. If you have that every now and then and again, the body is functioning well enough to be able to break it down without just storing it as fat, correct?
That's correct. Or, you may, again, the body is designed to automatically regulate everything. If you think about it, right, like our blood pressure, our heart rate, our breathing rate, these are things which we can temporarily elevate or temporarily lower. But over the course of our lifetime, our body is fundamentally balancing it out, right? We all learned in high school biology class this concept of homeostasis. And every living organism that is functioning properly always seeks to be at homeostasis. So if we can just, again, keep our biology working the way it's supposed to, we will achieve homeostasis without even trying. And I know that might sound like some too good to be true, like magic, you can lose weight without trying. But if you think about, again, the concept of a calorie wasn't even introduced into the chemistry community until 1824. And it didn't make it into the mainstream until the 70s. However, for hundreds of thousands of years, before we knew what a calorie was, we avoided obesity and diabetes. How did we do that? By doing the same things we need to do today to do the same things we did back then. We just ate food, and our body took care of the rest.
All right, so what is the process then if we do indeed have a diet filled with insane foods, to use your term, and I'm feeling so bad for mothers whose kids have been conditioned by television and commercials about snacks and cereals, and they're the media is training our kids not to eat well right from the get-go. But what happens when we have a lot more of these insane foods in our body? What is the process of digestion then, and what happens?
Well, maybe what would also be helpful, and tell me if it's not, is really how do we transition? Like, we live in an insane culture. You are exactly right. We live in a culture where if you go in the grocery store, literally 90 to 95% of the things sold there are insane. Because, it's the center aisles, right? The entire center of the grocery store is by and large insane. It's the perimeter, the stuff that needs to be refrigerated or frozen, that isn't insane. Those are the same things, generally speaking. So how do you transition from insanity to sanity in an insane culture? My recommendation is to focus on just two things. Because let's simplify this. So focus on two things. First and foremost is non-starchy vegetable consumption. So forget about everything else. Just for 21 days, focus on these two things. Consume, however is possible for you, at least 10 servings of non-starchy vegetables per day. And I know that's a lot of non-starchy vegetables. There's many reasons why it's valuable, and we can get into that if we have time. The second thing you have to do, and I'll give you some tips on how to do that, because I know it's a lot, and I know it's not. The average American consumes about one. So it's a tenfold increase. The second thing to do is to consume 30 to 50 grams of protein, again, depending on your size, 3 to 4 to 5 times a day, again, depending on your size and your activity level. If you just do that, so let me tell you why that's so important. First, the non-starchy vegetables are going to flood your body with so much nutrition and so many things that help to detoxify you. Not only things like fiber and chlorophyll, but just vitamins and minerals and all kinds of other good stuff. They're also going to take up a massive amount of room in your digestive system, so it's going to be very difficult for you to eat insane food. You will literally be too full for dessert. We've all had that experience, and we can have it again. Now, when it comes to the protein, this is going to help to satisfy you. It's also going to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, meaning your body is actually going to create new tissue. And this doesn't mean you're going to grow giant muscles. It just means your body is going to essentially, think about it like it's going to freshen up the tissues in your body. It's going to refresh them. And what's so profound about this is it can burn a dramatic number of calories. Like, you could almost think about it that when you eat protein in these doses of 30 to 50 grams, it does to your muscles kind of what exercise does, meaning it makes them burn more calories. It also fills you up. And again, both of these things put together make you too full for insane foods. And it is much easier to say no to the rice and much easier to say no to the dessert when you have so much main course, high protein main course, and so many non-starchy vegetables that you just don't even have, like, your plate is full. There's nowhere to put the roll. So you're just like, well, skip it. I don't want it. I've got enough food. And there's no need to have dessert because you're like, oh, my God, my stomach is so full, I can't eat anything.
So it's 30 to 50 grams of protein. How many times a day?
Minimum of 3. I would say maximum of 6 if you're like an elite bodybuilder, but 3 for most people.
Well, I'm not an elite bodybuilder.
So think breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So let me quickly, Leslie, if it's helpful, step you through like breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Sure.
A sane transition of breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Go ahead.
So breakfast, for example, again, so you got to have some non-starchy vegetables. So one way to do that is either to generally with like an omelet or something with a bunch of green leafy vegetables because they cook down. They're tiny. Like, it is very easy to eat 3 servings of cooked down spinach or kale. You could throw some peppers, some mushrooms, some onions in there. Delicious. So very, very tasty. You could also do something like a Greek yogurt with some fruit, some low-sugar fruit, like berries, for example. Blueberries are a fantastic choice, or some cottage cheese with some blueberries. If you're really short on time, you could make smoothies. This is going to sound a little bit odd, but I promise if you try it, it's really not that bad. So you could do something like some spinach. Again, you're like, oh, my God, spinach in a smoothie. Just trust me. Just try it once. Take spinach, mix it with some citrus, like an orange, or some strawberries, and potentially some protein powder, like a vanilla whey protein, potentially. And it creates a delicious strawberry green vanilla smoothie. You really don't taste the spinach too much. So that's breakfast. Lunch can be really any number of things. A popular option is a giant salad topped with either salmon or some sort of poultry. Of course, you could have eggs. You could have, again, really any kind of nutrient-dense protein, a bunch of vegetables, and you can enjoy whole food natural fats, so nuts and seeds. And then dinner, again, so many options. I mean, even things which are traditionally insane, like spaghetti. Well, yeah, you're not going to eat spaghetti, but you could use zucchini to make faux spaghetti noodles, or spaghetti squash to make faux spaghetti noodles. If you want to eat something with a rice dish, you don't have to eat rice. You can use a cauliflower ricer to make the non-starchy vegetable cauliflower into a rice-like substance. Even pizza, just use almond flour instead of flour. So really, we can get it sanitized,
That's good.
Almost anything by making these simple substitutions.
All right, you mentioned yogurt, and then I did want to discuss cheese and milk. I mean, it's the first dairy product that you have mentioned, and why is Greek yogurt different than regular yogurt? Maybe we should go there first.
Sure. So the reason I recommend the 2 dairy products, Greek yogurt and cottage cheese, is because of the ratio of protein to sugar. So, for example, if you were to look at, say, milk, so a standard 8-ounce glass of skim milk, that contains 12 grams of sugar in the form of lactose and 8 grams of protein. So there's 50% more sugar than there is protein. One serving of, let's say, Greek yogurt will contain about 24 grams of protein and about 7 grams of sugar. So there's approximately 300% more protein than there is sugar. So you can see milk, 50% more sugar than protein, Greek yogurt, 300% more protein than sugar. So it's a great source of that protein, which we need in those 30-plus gram doses I talked about earlier.
And what about other cheeses?
So other cheeses can be – so cheese, by and large, with the exception of cottage cheese, is fat, primarily fat. It's usually 60+% fat, which, again, doesn't intrinsically make it bad for you. I generally like to think of cheese as again, your focus of your eating should be non-starchy vegetables and nutrient-dense protein, and then you fill in the rest with low-sugar fruits and whole food natural fats. So, can you eat some cheese as a treat to help satisfy you? Yes. Should the main portion of your meal be cheese? No. So, okay. It's one of those things where enjoying in moderation is just fine.
Right, exactly. I think that's great. I want to talk about the concept, and I'm watching the clock here too, Jonathan, about internal starvation. What is that all about?
So internal starvation is when we're pretty, I have to back up a little bit because it has to do with insulin and insulin sensitivity and things like that. So when we eat food, it digests in our stomach and breaks down into, fat breaks down into fatty acids, carbohydrate break down into glucose, and protein breaks down into amino acids. Now, for us to get amino acids and carbohydrate into our tissues that need it, like our heart and our muscles, to function in our brain, well, not for our brain, but we need insulin. Insulin is essentially like the key that unlocks the door to the cell. So we've got glucose running around our bloodstream, and it goes up to a muscle cell, and it's like, hi, muscle cell, I'm here to fuel you. And unless there's some insulin along with it, it can't get in. So insulin gets released. The glucose gets into the cell is fueled, we continue to function. Good news. Now, when we become insulin resistant or pre-diabetic, essentially, what that means is we need more and more insulin to unlock the door to our cells, meaning our cells basically start ignoring insulin. So insulin's knocking at the door. The cell's like, I don't care. So now two little things of insulin conceptually need to start knocking on the door. And eventually, if we become too insulin resistant, we have so much insulin flowing around in our bloodstream, and we have so much glucose in our bloodstream because our lean tissue isn't taking it up. Our body has a safety mechanism built into it, and that safety mechanism is that fat tissue will always give glucose a happy home. So glucose gets to the door of the muscle cell. It's with a bunch of insulin, but the muscle cell is like, nope, not going to let you in because I've become insulin resistant. So we just go to the fat cell, and the fat cell always gives us a happy home. But now the problem is, so now we've got all of our energy going into our fat cells, but we also have this abundance of insulin in our bloodstream. Well, insulin, for all intents and purposes, makes burning fat impossible in our body. It just can't, you can't mix oil and water. You cannot burn fat when you have insulin circulating in your body. So we have all of our fuel going into our fat cells, and then we can't burn it. We can't burn our fat tissue for energy thanks to insulin resistance. So if you think about it, we're eating food, but we're starving internally because we eat food, all the glucose and energy goes into our fat cells, and then we can't burn our fat. So what does our body have to do? It has to tell us to eat more food. So we eat more and more and more food, and we get fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter, but we're actually starving because the only cells that are getting nourished are our fat cells, which we then can't burn, which is a really unfortunate state.
I think that was a good description of everything. And you mentioned something the first time that you were on about wheat and sugar being a bad combination. And, of course, I'm thinking breakfast cereals, and most American children and children everywhere start off with, cereal on the table. But you linked that right to diabetes last time. Am I getting this right? It's just coming into my mind.
Yeah, so insane foods are, in short, starches and sugars. So starches and sweets are insane. They're dry. They're low in fiber. They're low in protein. They're completely unsatisfying. They're horribly aggressive. They're not nutritious. And they're incredibly efficiently converted into fat by our body. And the reason that they, again, cause diabetes is they trigger this abundance. One, we eat a lot of them, and they're uniquely insulinogenic, meaning they trigger a huge amount of insulin. So we eat a lot of them, and even if we didn't, we'd still trigger a lot of insulin. So it's like a 1-2 punch. It's like this giant flood of insulin in our body. And just like if we were to drink a lot of alcohol continuously, like we would eventually develop a tolerance, and we would need to drink more and more alcohol to get the same effect, and then eventually our liver would start to shut down because it can't process all of that alcohol.
Right.
Same thing happens with insulin. So we eat these foods, we produce more and more insulin because we develop a tolerance for insulin, but then our pancreas, which is what produces insulin, starts to break down because it's like, I can't keep producing all this insulin. Like, this isn't technically true, but imagine that your pancreas can only produce 1 million units of insulin over the course of your life. Like, when it's gone, you're diabetic, and now you have to start shooting insulin into your body. And that's not a good scenario. And, of course, that's a gross oversimplification, but you understand the point.
I do understand the point. So, I mean, we really need to be watching breakfast foods for our kids, because what we're doing, and I think with a combination of a lack of sleep, and we're going to talk about sleep in just a moment, a lack of sleep, and then leading to insulin resistance and pre-diabetic states, according to Science Daily, and then also the starch and the sugars combined doing the same thing. We really are, men and women, pretty hormonally imbalanced from the get-go.
We absolutely are. And again, think about starch is the most people get sugar's bad for you. They don't necessarily understand how bad it is for us. Like, they think it's empty calories. It's much more than that. Like, it's not just empty calories. Like, it is actively causing hormonal chaos in your body. So it's doubly bad. And then starch is a tough one for most people because we think to ourselves, again, like, starch is in the Bible. Starch is such a core part of our culture. And that's fine. To be clear, like, smoking is a core part of many European cultures and was a core part of our culture, too. That doesn't necessarily mean we wouldn't be healthier if we didn't smoke. And it's also been around for a really long time. That doesn't mean it's good for us. And it's also the case that even when we say it's been around for a long time, that's technically not true. Starch was first introduced into the human diet about 12 to 10,000 years ago, which seems like a long time ago. But human evolution has been taking place over 3 to 5 million years. So that's actually the most recent 0.2% of the evolution of our metabolic and hormonal systems. So that kind of explains why so many people, for example, have gluten intolerance, because they simply, this isn't recognized as food to their bodies, whereas cultures that have eaten starch for longer periods of time can tolerate it, like they're not gluten intolerant, but it's still not the optimal food for them.
So let's go back to sleep then. Is sleep insomnia, is that also a hormone imbalance affected by all of this?
Oh, absolutely, right. Melatonin, serotonin, all of these things. I mean, the reason we're not sleeping, I mean, if you want to keep someone awake, shoot them up with adrenaline. I mean, they're not going to go to sleep. That's how tired they are. So, again, there's very little in our body that hormones and enzymes are, that's just what our body does. If it's happening in your body, like, why do kids grow? Because of hormones. Just name something. Unless it's a virus or a bacteria, the cause has to do with hormones.
And then the hormone imbalance is classified into so many different diseases. Diabetes, for one, correct? Alopecia,
correct. Hair
loss. Balding, I think, is also a hormone imbalance issue. And, of course, the rest are anxiety and the panic attacks, all possible hormone imbalance.
Hormone imbalance, as well as certainly genetic factors. So, like, hair loss would be a good one, where there's if your father and grandfather on both sides have no hair, chances are there's very little you can do with your hormones to prevent your hair from falling out either. But hormones and genetics play a role together.
So we're really just beginning to understand the importance of hormones in our body and their role, their function, and really they are the foundation of our health and well-being.
Absolutely. And I would say the more we learn, the more we realize we don't know yet. So, obviously we know more than we ever have, but we also start to learn about cofactors and other complicated things where we're just really scratching the surface. You're exactly right.
Well, holy hormones, honey, Andy. What do you think?
Well, I think a lot, actually. It comes down to affordability is a huge issue to have this sustaining diet and eat naturally. I mean, it's not cheap to do these things anymore.
It's not cheap. It's very expensive to get sick. And you're more miserable
Very
sick
true as
than
well,
you
too.
are.
But the availability of, like, quality fruits and vegetables and seasons, and there's a lot of things to consider, but if you can do it, you can do it, you know?
Well, and Andy, let me add one thing.
Yeah, we just have a couple minutes.
Yeah, this will be really quick. So I think it's very certainly, for example, if the message was you can only eat organically grown, local, pesticide-free, SANE, that is impossible for most people. And is that ideal? Yes. However, is eating conventional SANE better than eating starches and sweets? Yes. So it would encourage us to do the best that we can with that which is available to us, rather than just throwing our hands in the air and saying, well, I can't be perfect, so forget about it.
Well, I think we're going to have to leave it on that note. And Jonathan, thank you for a perfect interview.
My pleasure.
Got you there. Jonathan Bailor, the Smarter Science of Slim. We'll have you back another time. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. And that's going to wrap it up here at Holy Hormones, honey. All those hormones. I can't believe I'm sitting in the right place at the right time. Hormones. Would have. Anyway, why are men so angry? That's what we're going to be talking about next Monday night. Men Alive focuses.
Because.
That's a loaded question. Jed Diamond, actually, I got ahead of myself. Jed Diamond, PhD, MCSW, is going to be my guest. He is the author of Men Alive. He also has a website by the same thing. And he has got a new book out, Men Alive, Stop Killer Stress with Simple Energy Healing Tools, bringing together wisdom accumulated in 40 years of helping more than 20,000 men, women, and children. And that is coming up next week on Holy Hormones, honey, the greatest story never told. And, of course, you're listening to KRFC Fort Collins. We'll be back next week. See you then. Take care and blessings.